When learning a language, oftentimes one of the harder aspects to grasp is a language's numeral system. This is partly due to the fact that numerals are processed differently in the brain than language is, but also due to the fact that every language has a weird little quirks when it comes to its numeral systems. Look at German swapping of the ones and tens place, or the fact that Arabic numerals disagree in gender with the nouns they modify. Topic for another day. However, a language that truly exemplifies this uniqueness of numerals is that of Korean. Like with many East Asian languages, counters are a must-have when counting objects. It also makes use of floating quantification, a feature I was fascinated by in a previous video on Japanese that also exists to a small extent in European languages. Also like with Japanese, Korean possesses two sets of numeral systems: the native system and Sinitic loans. Unlike in Japanese, where the native system has mostly been deprecated outside of specific contexts, with most contexts calling for the Sinitic loanwords, Korean instead keeps its native numerals in much more frequent use, alongside their Sinitic counterparts. Hello morphemes, phonemes, and graphemes. Welcome back, and let us take a look at Korean numerals. So some background. Korean had one set of numbers, classical Chinese came along, shook things up, dropped off its own numeral system, and now Korean has two sets of numbers. Got it? Good. Now I don't know how common it is to have two sets of numerals running side by side like this. I know it exists in Japanese, as I mentioned previously, and Irish to a lesser degree as well when counting people. But unlike those two previous examples, it is much less restrictive within Korean, with both systems being used in different contexts. I say less restricted, but Korean numbers are much less used with higher amounts, with people often switching to Sinitic numbers instead. The cutoff is technically around 99, but most people switch much earlier than that, with some accounts saying 60, and I've seen accounts as low as 40. The systems may also be mixed a little bit apparently, with numbers 100 and above being Sinitic, with numbers 99 and below being native. But that does seem to be debated a bit, with certain comments saying that it's wrong and others saying it's natural, but we'll let the comments decide that. Either way, what we do know is that aside from just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, the systems themselves are not exactly interchangeable. The first way they differ is that certain measure words call for one system over another. For example, there are two different measure words for month. The native measure word, dal, is used with native numbers, and the loan word, gewol, is used with the loaned numbers, obviously. A similar thing happens with years, days, as well as like saying one's age, with the native measure words taking native numbers, and the Sinitic measure words taking Sinitic numbers. More often than not, however, when counting physical objects, native measure words will come into play. And when measuring things, Sinitic loans will come into play. So dogs, people, glasses, plates, and so forth will generally use native numbers, while meters, grams, money, days, years, and so on will use the Sinitic numbers. Of course, these are not hard and fast rules, as one will have to remember which numbering system to use on a counter-by-counter basis. But, they're still fairly consistent, from what I've read. What is interesting, however, is that some counters take both systems, but with slightly different meanings between them. These counters are part of a group of what I call self-counters, since they're not actually counting an external object, but just counting instances of themselves. These counters, such as jang and chung, are used as full-on nouns. And when they use native numbers, they just count instances of themselves. I read 3 chapters, or I climbed 15 floors. When they use Sinitic numbers, however, they have an ordinal meaning to them. So I read chapter 3, or I live on the 15th floor. What's interesting about this ordinal usage of Sinitic numbers is that Korean actually has a dedicated ordinal system. There are actually 2 types of ordinal marking, one for the native numbers, and of course one for the Sinitic numbers. For native numbers, j is added after the numeral, with hana being replaced by cho. If a counter is present, then j can be added directly after said counter, though from what I've seen, it just seems more common to replace the counter with ponje instead. For Sinitic numbers, the prefix j is just added. However, because analytic numbers already carry a sense of ordinality to them, this j prefix is often just dropped outside of writing and highly formal situations. Now this interacts in interesting ways with the self-counters I was talking about earlier, which in turn bleeds into the usage of other counters to a lesser extent. See, despite me saying earlier that Sinitic numbers carry an ordinal quality to them, it's actually a different flavor of ordinal quality than from what we see with ponche. 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 Ponche? Ponche. Je. 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 Ponche. Ponche. Fuck. Sinitic numbers in these contexts are classificatory. Classificatory. Meaning that they are assigned to a specific unit. The first floor of a building will always be the first floor, and the third chapter of a book will always be the third chapter. If you wanted to say, however, that you read your third chapter of the day, you would use the native numbers with j added after the counter. So I actually don't know how legal this form is, because I think it's more common to say ponje and then the counter. I think. Ponje can also be used with other measure words that take Sinitic numbers to convey a similar meaning. And for measure words of time, just j is used, even if the numbers are Sinitic in origin. Now if that seems confusing, that is because it 100% is, and I barely understand myself, and a lot of the resources I'm using do not explain it very well. I literally made this video just to complain about this, and to also showcase an interesting linguistic phenomenon to people who aren't learning this language. But either way, thank you as always to my patrons and members, and until next time, I bid you adieu.